Hi there, and welcome back to the Delivered Podcast. I'm your host, Athena Estelle, and I'm so glad that you've joined us this week. This week is going to be an awesome, educational, insightful, super fun interview with my new friend, Courtney. She is a mom who survived and is now thriving through her own postpartum depression journey. She has started an awesome outlet on Instagram called Beyond PPD. And we are so lucky that she's here today. So welcome, Courtney.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. I'm so excited. I think this is just another great example of like the power of social media.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. So I'm grateful that you're here. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We talked a little bit pre-recording, about Beyond PPD and how that came to be. But go ahead and just take your time, tell the listeners about your own postpartum journey and what led to that, because it's just so important.
Yeah, so my daughter was born in February of 2020. She was our first. We had taken some time. My husband and I actually got married in 2012, so we had taken some time to get through school, get settled in our careers, all of that before we had kids. And she was born late February of 2020. So that is probably throwing up some alarm bells, throwing up some flags, because as we all know, things went absolutely sideways in March of 2020. I remember actually before we had her, we bought like one of those huge jugs of hand sanitizer. And then after, that was like one of the last times you could buy one of those because the pandemic happened, the COVID-19 pandemic happened. And we went from having 3 weeks of normal parenthood and new parenthood where we had friends come over and meet her. We had our parents over. My parents stayed with us for a week, actually. After she was born, they came over and stayed with us just to help us adjust because she was born late at night. So by the time we left the hospital, my husband and I hadn't slept for probably 48 hours.
Awful.
Right. And so, like, my parents came over and stayed with us. My father-in-law would drop in and bring us breakfast in the morning on his way to work. Like, we had all those 3 weeks of normalcy. And then all of a sudden, we were on our own because we were locked in our home. We were in lockdown. We weren't allowed to leave except for important appointments, doctor's appointments. So, like, we could still take her to her pediatrician and everything. But only one of us could go in with her. So, like, my husband would drive us there and I would take her in and he would sit in the car. And our parents were all essential workers. My parents are retail pharmacists. My mother-in-law at the time was working HR for a manufacturing company, and my father-in-law was managing a grocery store. So these are all people that are interacting with the public, many times the sick public, on a day-to-day basis. So there's no way they could come over and help us, or we could go and see them with our brand new infant when we had no idea how COVID affected newborns at the time. And I have had a history of mood and anxiety disorders. I have always kind of skewed a little more anxious, a little more neurotic. Found out after I got through all of this, my therapist, when we were really kind of like delving into this, and she was like, I don't think you have generalized anxiety disorder. I think you actually have OCD. So found out I actually have OCD after all of this. But I had a history already of mood and anxiety disorders. So I knew kind of going into it that I had a higher risk for having something like postpartum depression. But I was kind of like, it's not going to happen to me. You never think it's going to happen to you. And I remember it started very, very early. I was like 3 days postpartum and feeling like a lot of guilt because I had wanted to breastfeed my daughter, and come to find out that's just not what worked for us. They checked us at the hospital many times, said her latch was perfect, everything's great, but it hurt so badly and I just didn't enjoy it. And I cried through an entire middle of the night feeding just because it hurt and I was uncomfortable and I didn't like it. And he was just like, this is not worth it. We can feed her formula. Everything is okay. But I was feeling such immense guilt from that because you hear all the time, breast is best. This is the best option. You should feed, you should try and make it a full year, at least 6 months. And I was just like, I absolutely hate this. I don't want to do this. And so I felt so much guilt about that. So I was already starting to have these thoughts of, you can't even feed your baby. You don't want to feed your baby, that sort of thing. And bless my husband, he knew basically from those 3 days that something was not right. And he was like, can you just text your therapist? Can you call your OB? Can we call like the lactation support at the hospital? This was still before lockdown. This was only 3 or 4 days postpartum. So this was before the pandemic. And I was just like, no, I'm fine. They had told me a lot about the baby blues at the hospital. So I was just like, it's the baby blues. It'll be gone in 2 weeks. I'm fine. Baby blues. It's fine. And I remember he gets 4 weeks of paid leave, actually, which is amazing for dads. And he didn't have to take it concurrently, like all in a row. So he took a week off, and then he was like, I'm going to go try and go back to work, And so I remember the day he went back to work that night before, I had an absolute anxious meltdown. I was like, I cannot be by myself. I can't be by myself with this baby. I don't know what I'm doing. Who sent me home with this baby? Like I can't do it. I can't do it. And so my mom ended up coming back over, and she was like, I'm going to be here for moral support, but you're going to do all the things to prove to yourself that you can do this by yourself. And I was like, that's fine. I just need someone here with me, so I'm not by myself, because I don't want to be by myself.
I get it. That
should have been kind of like a first, hey, something's not right, because I was absolutely terrified of being home with her by myself. And that's not really normal. But I was blaming it on baby blues. I was blaming it on crashing hormones, all of that, and trying not to admit that something was wrong. He was only at the office for like a week before he texted me, and he was like, they're sending us home. I'm packing up my cube. Like, we don't know when we're going back. They're sending us home. And at first I was like, yay, someone's home with me. Like, I was like, I'm not by myself. Yay. But at the time, his office had never had a remote work policy. So he basically had to pretend he was at his office, and he had to submit all of these timesheets of exactly what he was doing, like hour by hour, to prove that he was being a functional employee. So he worked upstairs in our loft at the time, and I was downstairs with my daughter. And she was a very, very clingy baby. I affectionately, and sometimes not so affectionately, called her my little Velcro baby, because she had to be with me all the time. I did all of this research on like the best swings and the best bouncers and the pack and play with all the different things on it. And, this swing, you can pull the seat off and it turned into a rocker, and you can rock it in this, all of this stuff. She hated every single thing. Hated all of it. Didn't want any of it. Put her in it and she'd be fine for like 30 seconds. And then she'd start screaming bloody murder. Like, wanted nothing to do with it. And so I would be stuck on the couch. I would just put snacks like all around me on the couch and things I could reach and eat with one hand, because she wouldn't let me put her down. Yeah. And so I was feeling very trapped already, because I have this baby that does not want to be put down. And on top of that, the fact that we are literally not allowed to leave our house because of the pandemic. And that is where things started to spiral, because on top of that, she was starting to cry in the evenings. Around 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock at night, she would start crying.
The witching hour, we call it.
Yes, exactly. She would just start crying inconsolably for like 3 or 4 hours, just crying nonstop. And I remember asking at one of her child checkups, like, how much crying is normal? Because this doesn't feel normal.
No, that was us literally every night. And when my mom was here, she would take her outside and be like, we're going to go look at the moon. Mom, she doesn't care about the moon.
Yes, exactly.
No, it's the air. It's the air. It'll work. I kid you not. Every night my mom did that, she was like silent and happy. And then every time I would try it, screaming. And I was like, I don't know.
Everyone was like, put her in water, put her in the bath. And I'm like, well, to do that, I would have to get her naked, and she hates being naked. So I don't know. And so like the witching hours were starting, and that's very stressful. And I, like you mentioned, your mom came over. We couldn't have that because this is pandemic times. We weren't allowed to have people over. All of our parents were essential workers. We're not allowed to have people over. So it's just my husband and I, like, nonstop. We're not getting breaks. We're not getting relief from anyone. And we also notice that after she eats, no matter how much she eats, whether it's a little, whether it's a lot, she's starting to arch her back and scream after she's eating. And we're like, this is not right. This is weird. And there was one night where she was just screaming and screaming and screaming. And we texted my parents because they're pharmacists. And she seems like she's in pain. Like, this is not a normal cry. She is screaming. And they're like, well, just give her a little bit of Tylenol just to get her to sleep. See if you can call your pediatrician's office and get her in the morning. My husband's like, cool, that makes sense. So as he's going to the cabinet and getting the Tylenol, like literally reaching for the Tylenol, I go, stop. And he's like, what? And I'm like, what if we give her too much and she overdoses and she dies? And he's like, it's Tylenol.
I get it.
He's trying to like rationalize here. He's a very logical, very rational person. My husband is an accountant. He's a very logical person. He is my logic to my all emotional feely things.
I get that.
Like he's showing me the syringe. He's like, I literally can't get more than this. Like this is all it'll give me. And I'm like, but she's so tiny. What if she dies? And he's like, she's not gonna die. But that was the anxiety and that was the intrusive thoughts that are like, we're gonna give her too much and she's gonna overdose and she's gonna die. And he was just like, no, this is not going to happen. And it finally got to the point where the screaming overtook the anxiety. And I was like, just give her some so she'll stop screaming. And she did. And we finally got some sleep, called the pediatrician, and they got us in. And our pediatrician was amazing. He was just like, obviously something's not right. She's having tummy problems. We're going to figure it out. And so we switched her to a comfort formula. She ended up being diagnosed with what's called silent reflux, where instead of, when you think of reflux with babies, you think of like the Exorcist style spewing across the room type thing. She spit up a lot, but it wasn't like constant spitting up. And we could hear it when this happened. She would start to gurgle like she was going to spit up, and then she would swallow it. So instead of it coming out, she's getting that acid coming up, and then instead of letting it out, she's swallowing it and it's going back down. So it's scorching her little throat up and down every time this happens. And we got her on reflux medication. We got her on little oral baby Pepsid, and that helped. That did help. She was actually on that until she was a year old because it just stuck around for that long. And that helped deal with the pain she was having after the bottles, but it didn't stop this nonstop crying that she was having. Because now we're not just having witching hours. We are having like day-long crying. If she is not asleep or eating, she is crying. And all of this time, my brain is telling me, you're a complete failure. Your one job right now is to console your baby. And you can't even do that. Why did you become a mom? Because you're clearly terrible at this. That's what I'm feeling all this time because, you know, I have a lot of friends that we all had babies at the same time. And I'm not seeing them have their babies scream constantly. They're able to put their babies down in their pack and plays to take a nap. They're able to put their babies in their swings and let them sit for a little while. Mine doesn't do that. So if they're all doing it and I can't, then clearly I'm the problem here. That's the thought process that I'm having here. And it's just this constant barrage of her crying and my brain telling me, you screwed up, you made a mistake, and it's your fault she's like this. You know, you aren't cut out for this. You aren't a good mom. You're a failure. You should have never done this. And I never had thoughts. The way I rationalized this was because I never had thoughts of harming myself or harming my daughter. Because my thought of what PPD was you cry a lot and you want to hurt yourself or hurt your baby. And I'm like, well, I'm crying a lot, but I don't want to hurt myself or hurt my baby. I had thoughts of running away, of going to my parents' house, going to my sister's house, going to my in-laws. Because I thought my husband and my daughter would be better off if I was at home. Because clearly I'm the problem here. That was what I was thinking, was I'm the problem. Because he handles this so much better than I do. So I'm the problem. They would be better if I wasn't in the house. Not that I would be gone or, you know, dead, but just not here. Just with my parents, with my in-laws, something like that. So I don't have postpartum depression because I don't want to hurt myself. I don't want to hurt her. So it's not PPD. And the whole time my husband's just like, something's not right. Will you please text your therapist? Will you please call your doctor? And I'm like, it's fine. I don't have it.
Yeah.
And I remember vividly, to this day, just very vividly, I had woken up before she did. And I was like, you know what? I got some time. She's still asleep. I'll get caught up on some laundry because even though she wasn't spitting up a lot, she was still spitting up quite a bit. We're all going through multiple outfit changes still at this point. So I was like, I'll get caught up on laundry. And the way our house at the time was set up was our master bedroom was like over here on this end of the hallway. There's a little hallway and a loft where my husband worked. And then on the other side of the loft was our laundry room. So the entrance to the laundry room was literally like steps from his desk. So he's working and I go into the laundry room. I start the washer, start putting stuff in, and I can hear her just down the hall start waking up and she's starting to cry. And I just collapsed against the washer and started sobbing. And my husband like leans back in his chair and looks at me. He's like, "You okay? What's going on?" And all I could choke out was, "I can't do this anymore. I can't do this. I just can't."
Yeah.
And he immediately texted his supervisor. He's like, I'm taking a day off, taking a personal day, taking a leave day. He got up and got her, took her downstairs. And he said, go back into our room, shut the door, turn the white noise machine on so you can't hear anything, and just go to sleep. I got this. Just go to sleep. And so I did. I slept for a good several hours, and then I went downstairs, and he's like, okay, will you call someone? And I'm like, I only have like a week until my postpartum appointment. I can make it till then. And he's still not thrilled with that idea, but at least I'm talking to someone at this point. And then few days later, sitting on the couch, and I get a call from my OB's office. And they're like, hey, we're just letting you know that the hospital network has decided that postpartum visits are going to be virtual because of the pandemic. And I'm like, nope. Because in that moment, like that was an appointment about me. I know a lot of new moms, you go from seeing your OB, once a month, twice a month. And then at the very end, you're seeing them once a week. You're in that office once a week talking to them. And then you have the baby and you get nothing for 6 weeks. Baby has lots of appointments. You're seeing your pediatrician a lot, but you are not seeing your doctor.
Right.
So this was the one thing that was supposed to be about me. I can't leave the house. I can't take her places. I can't even go to the grocery store. This was my one lifeline to the outside world that was about me. And it felt like that lifeline was just cut in that moment. And so I immediately start crying and I'm trying everything I can think of to get them to let me into the office and see my doctor. Because I love my OB. She's amazing. I wish she could be my doctor for everything because I just love her so much. And I was like, well, I've got stitches. You have to let me come in because I've got stitches and you need to make sure they're healed. And they were like, nope, we can't do that. We have to make them virtual. So I'm like, well, I want the arm implant. I want the Nexplanon in my arm. And you have to let me in because you can't do that over the phone. You can't put something in my arm over the phone. And they're like, well, the health department has determined that's not a necessary procedure. That's an elective procedure. So we can't do that. We can put you back on the pill, but we can't do that. And I was like, I was begging with this poor receptionist to please let me come in. Let me come in. Let me talk to my doctor. Let me see my doctor. And she just had to keep telling me like, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. We can't. That's just not how this is going. We're not letting postpartum women back in the office. And I'm still salty about that. When I finally did get to see my OB that summer, like July or August, something like that, she was just like, I'm so sorry. That was not my decision. That was not my call. Her hands were tied. So that was another just gut punch in this whole experience that it was not going the way I expected it to at all. So I finally did have that phone call and they asked like, all she had to ask was like, how are you feeling? And the floodgates just opened. I was just like, I don't feel like myself. Something is not right. I'm crying all the time. I'm having these terrible thoughts. Not only was I having these thoughts that I'm a horrible person, but I was also having intrusive thoughts about harm coming to my baby. We had a really steep staircase at the time, so I kept having these thoughts of what if you miss a step and you fall and now you're hurt and now your baby's hurt? Or what if you drop her? Or, because we were in a pandemic with a brand new virus, we had no idea how it impacted babies. What if she gets sick? What if she gets really sick and has to be hospitalized and you can't be there because they're not letting people in the hospital if you're not a patient? I'm having all of these terrible, terrible thoughts. And she was very, very kind. And she was like, I think you have postpartum depression. It happens. We're going to get you help. It's going to be okay. And she immediately contacted my primary care physician. Most days of the week, they're actually in the same building. She's on the 3rd floor. My primary care doctor's on the 2nd. They're both in the same network. So all they had to do was just share like my chart messages with each other because they can access all the same files and everything. My primary care doctor's office called me like 2 hours later, and they were like, we heard from your OB. Let's get you scheduled with a virtual appointment. And I had it like the next day, 2 days later. And they went through, it wasn't the Edinburgh scale, if you're familiar with the Edinburgh, or in-depth one. But she was like, you are depressed. You have high levels of depression. You have high levels of anxiety, but we're going to get you better. And so they put me on Lexapro, and I was very lucky in that the Lexapro worked right away. I didn't have to go through the 6 weeks of, oh, this one kind of works for me. It doesn't really work for me. Let's try another one. Like, I got lucky off the bat that it worked for me right away.
That's awesome.
Yes. Took a couple weeks to build up in my system, that sort of thing. But I remember vividly the day it did, because it was like there was color back in my world again. Like, it felt like the shade had been lifted. And she's still crying. We're still in a pandemic. We're still not allowed to leave the house. But I felt capable of dealing with these things again. I wasn't having these constant thoughts of, you're a failure, you're terrible, why did you do this, all of that. So I just consider myself very, very, very lucky, because even in normal times, there are a lot of moms, a lot of parents that they don't get the help they need.
Right.
And I was in a pandemic and a virtual appointment, and I was able to get the help that I needed.
Yeah.
And I think so much about all the other moms that had babies when I did in 2020, that had virtual appointments. And like I said before, I have a history of mood and anxiety disorders. I have always been very open about the fact that I have a lot of anxiety. I had panic attacks, this sort of thing. So I was already comfortable with talking about my mental health. I'd been in therapy for several years. I am very comfortable talking about my mental health. How many moms in 2020, early 2020, that this was their first experience with a mental health condition?
Me.
Right. And they didn't.
And a COVID baby. I mean, just like you. I mean, she was June, but still.
And they didn't know how to talk about that because they'd never experienced anything like that before. How many of those moms got stuck in a virtual postpartum appointment and were able to fake it because they were over the phone and their doctor couldn't see the looks on their faces, or they couldn't, and they were able to keep their voice light and happy and put on that customer service voice and everything's great, everything's fine. And how many of them went untreated for who knows how long?
Right.
And so that's kind of where Beyond PPD came to be, because I was a mom that was stuck inside, stuck with her baby, looking to places like social media to see if there were other moms out there that were experiencing things like I was, to make sure that I was not going crazy. Are there other people experiencing things like this? And so I thought, if I could come up with even just a minimal basic account that shares the different kinds of perinatal mental health disorders and what symptoms you should be looking out for. And it's not just crying a lot. It's not just worrying a lot. Like, it's not just wanting to harm yourself or your baby. That does happen. That's not as common as all the other symptoms.
Right.
And so that's kind of how Beyond PPD came to be, was like, I was that mom. What can I do to help other moms know they are not alone, and that this is common? It's extremely common. It affects 1 in 5 women, 1 in 10 dads. But it's not normal, and you don't have to feel like this. You don't have to dread parenthood. You can enjoy it, even if your baby screams constantly. And that ended around 5 months, and she was suddenly like a happy baby, and I was like, oh my God, this is great. And once she could roll over and sit up and do things for herself, she got much happier. I think she just didn't like being a baby, and now she's 4.5, and she's an incredible preschooler, and all the things that make her the amazing 4.5-year-old that she is made her a very difficult infant, because she wants to do things by herself.
Yeah.
And she couldn't do that as an infant. So that is my story. I actually just had my son 11 months ago. I don't know how that happened. I feel like that first year went much faster with him than it did with her.
Did you have any signs of PPD after having him?
I did not. I stayed on my antidepressant all the way through my pregnancy with him. Okay. I did think I actually ended up, I was never officially diagnosed with it, but I do think I actually had perinatal depression with him because I ended up with a gestational diabetes diagnosis with him. And that diagnosis actually raises your risk of having some kind of perinatal mental health condition. It's because it's such an overwhelming condition. I had to go on insulin, which immediately makes you high risk. So I had many, many appointments, non-stress tests, ultrasounds. I was at my OB's office like 2 or 3 times a week near the end. All of that. It's a very overwhelming. On top of the fact that you have to change your diet entirely. And sometimes the foods that were safe, now suddenly they're not safe anymore. And you're dealing with all of that. And so I think I had prenatal depression with him. But after he was born, I had a much better experience. And he's a much different baby than she was. He was a very, and still is, because he's still a baby. He's a very laid back, easygoing, go with the flow kind of baby. Like, doesn't take a whole lot to, it takes a whole lot to ruffle his feathers. Unless he's hungry or tired, he's pretty easygoing and pretty happy. So it was just a very different experience the second time.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to have to tell my husband about that because I think the biggest risk or the biggest worry for me at this point is I still really have a desire to have a second child. And we talk about that pretty frequently in our house just because my daughter is a little bit younger than yours. She just turned 4, but I'm definitely not getting any younger. We waited until we were a little bit older, similar to you. We were married for 5 years. So we wanted to be married for a while and then start trying to have kids. And we got blessed. We were fertile. I had a great pregnancy, like all the things. But, now the fear is, will I get it again? And in my mindset is I have a great team. I know who to call. I know what to look for. I know X, Y, and Z. And I think you said so much that resounded with me, but I think just starting with the breastfeeding and having that be an issue, especially when it's in the beginning, like your first couple of days, that's so much to really mess with your mind.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, because it's like you said, breast is best, like all this stuff. And I get that. And obviously there's a time and place for it, but I'll never forget right before I agreed to get the epidural, because I told my OB, I told Chris, like natural birth, that's the goal. I tried not to get too attached, but like you, type A, this is what I want, all the things. And I remember I'm not getting an epidural, but I was in so much pain from the Pitocin that I was like, I don't even know if I'll survive delivering the baby.
I believe that.
Yeah. And I remember Chris looked at me and he was like, is this how you want to look back and remember your experience? Is this how you want to look back and remember your birth? And then I remember when I was struggling with the breastfeeding, he was like, is this how you want to look back at that? And I think for me, it was a mix of that. And I lost my sleep first. That was like my first sign, is like a full-blown insomniac. So to me, in order for me to try to get any type of healing or recovery, it was, we have to get you to sleep. Well, I couldn't take any sleeping medication and breastfeed. So it was a very quick switch when all of that happened. But still, I mean, the breastfeeding is a mind game in itself.
Yes.
And then you add the pandemic, like you said, all those virtual appointments. And I was very similar to you. I was like, but I need to see her in the flesh.
I was like, let me in.
Oh, yeah. And I remember, like, did they ever have it where, so it would have been summer here. Maybe it happened a little bit later because I know up north, I'm from Ohio. I remember they were a little bit more delayed. Their lockdown was way more severe. It lasted longer than here in Florida. But I remember when they did allow you to come back in the office, you still had to wait in your car. Do you remember that? You'd like wait in your car?
We were allowed to wait inside, but like they took a bunch of chairs out. There were only like 4 or 5 chairs in the waiting room and they were all spread out really far.
Ah, okay.
So I'm in Indiana, so I'm not far from where you're from.
Yeah.
Just north of Indianapolis. So we could go in, but everything was really spaced far apart and you had to wear a mask. I think they finally dropped wearing masks in medical appointments in like 2022, I feel like, because I didn't have to wear a mask when I was pregnant with my son, and I was pregnant with him in 2023, end of 2022, beginning of 2023.
Yeah. It's just a wild time to even think about it. And I mean, it was just so weird, like all of it. I remember going into the hospital to check in for my delivery because they had to induce me. It was a ghost town
with both of my kids.
Oh, were you?
Yes.
Yeah. Did yours take forever?
Actually, I apparently am one of these people that responds really well to inductions.
Oh, you're so annoying.
I know. I'm so sorry. Because with my daughter,
so jealous.
I was already 3 centimeters dilated with her at my last prenatal appointment. So they were like, oh, you can just come in. We'll just start you on Pitocin in the morning. And I was like, cool. So we rolled up at like 7:00. They had me going by like 8. She was born at like 11:15 at night. And then with my son, I wasn't dilated, so I did have to go in overnight. And it took like a couple rounds of the Cytotec or whatever it is, the one they put directly in your cervix. It took a couple rounds. It took all night. But then once it got going at like 8, he was born at 1:15, 1:20, something like that. So I'm someone that apparently responds very well.
That is so nice.
To induction. And I'm one of those people where I was like, all right, I know you're going to break my water, so get me that epidural before you break my water, and I will not. I will take 3 naps and we're good.
Oh, that's so great. I love it.
So I remember with the pandemic, my husband would go grocery shopping. And this was back when we didn't really know how it spread. Like, we all knew it spread from coughing and sneezing, like the droplets. But this was back before we knew whether or not it spread through touch. So he would go grocery shopping. I would make him bring the groceries in through the garage, keep them in the garage, send him straight upstairs, change clothes, shower. And I would sit downstairs, wear gloves, and just wipe down all the groceries with antibacterial wipes, disinfecting wipes. And I would go and I would follow him and I would disinfect everything he touched. Because I was like, we don't know.
No, you're smart. You're smart. It was scary.
I was fueled by anxiety, 100%. But
yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's the kinds of things we were doing because we had no idea.
And I remember, did you used to leave your packages in your garage for like 4
days? Yes, and let them like disinfect for a couple days before I leave anything? Yes.
Oh, yeah. And then like, I remember the one time he like brought them in the house, quote unquote, too soon. And he was like, what? We're going to throw out the box. And I was like, you're going to touch it. And then you're going to touch that. And then when you get the scissors, you're going to touch the scissors. And then and he was just like, okay, I'll wait another day next time. And I was like, okay, great.
Sounds exactly like my husband. He was like, I will do what you ask, but okay.
Yeah. Now, I hate to play like the what if game because obviously that's my downfall in so many areas of life. But has it ever occurred to you, or have you and your husband ever talked about it? You know, what if there wasn't COVID? Would your postpartum have not as been severe?
I think
you know what I'm saying.
I think I probably still would have had postpartum depression just because I have a lot of the risk factors. I have a history of mental health conditions. My daughter was colicky. She had reflux. I think it still would have happened. And it came on very quickly. Like, I was having symptoms within like a week or so. But I was pushing it off as like, it's baby blues. It's fine. But I don't think it would have gotten to the point that it did because I had no one around me to be like, girl, you're acting weird.
Yes.
I mean, my husband did, and he was trying very hard to be like, text your therapist, talk to your doctor. He was trying very hard to do that. And I talked about this with my mom because she was like, I would have dropped everything to be there with you. But she couldn't. And I think she would have recognized it too. And maybe hearing it from more than one person would have spurred me to get help sooner.
Yeah.
But at the time, I was only hearing it from my husband because there was no one else around us to see like the things I was experiencing. So I do think it would have still happened, but I don't think it would have gotten to the point that it did.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you. That's probably the best way to put it. I think it was just like the cherry on top that just blew up the sundae.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Like if we were not isolated, if we were not stuck at home, if we were not like 24/7, no breaks, like nothing ever stops.
Yeah.
Then maybe it would have still happened, but I don't think it would have been as bad.
Yeah. Agreed. And kudos to your husband. He sounds wonderful and very supportive.
I love him. I love him so much. He's amazing. And like I said, he knew something was wrong before I ever did or before I could even did it to myself. And he was very supportive the whole time. He wanted to come to appointments with me. He wanted to come in and do all of these things, but couldn't do that because of the pandemic.
Right.
But having him in my corner was instrumental in my recovery and in my getting help, because he was always in my corner, no matter what.
Right. And then the fact that your medication worked, and it seems like, I mean, you tell me, but would you say that by finding the medication in the beginning and getting the help, and it seemed like you had like a pretty steady like incline to recovery, once you hit that, it was like you kind of hit your stride and you were like, okay, I'm kind of coming around, right?
Yes. And I got back on my therapist schedule. Like, they have found a telehealth platform, so I was able to meet with her virtually and start working through and correcting these thought patterns and reframing and all those coping skills they teach you in therapy. Like I said, I feel extremely lucky that everything kind of aligned, and I had like this, basically like a runway, to just take off and get better. And I know that's not the case for a lot of women, a lot of parents. I know that's not the case. And that's why every time I talk about this, whether I'm on a podcast like this one, or I've shared my story during Postpartum Sport International trainings, like during the survivor panels that they do, I always say that I am so incredibly lucky, because there are so many parents that fall through the cracks, or they have to go through trial and error on medication multiple times. Or maybe they never even find a medication that works for them. Right. That sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even want to go into it. I feel like it gives me like PTSD, but I think before we found the medication that worked for me, I think I went through like 12.
Yeah.
I started to just feel like a lab rat. Like I said to Chris, and it's ironic. What you said stuck with me is when you told your husband that you didn't necessarily want to die. You just wanted to like leave him with the baby and just go. And I remember telling Chris constantly, I was like, just take Cecilia. You guys can have a nice life. You can find like a lovely lady, like go and move on. Like that. I would want
exactly what it was. I was like, I'm a problem. I'm the burden here. Don't want to die, but I just want to leave.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Because you'll be better off if I'm not here. Because I'm the problem.
Yeah. And then, it's like that whole failure mentality. We didn't talk about this pre-recording, but I think it's important. I mean, do you think that is just maybe the comparison of society and social media and our own hopes and expectations? And is it just like a mixed bag, or I don't know. What do you think?
Mixed bag. For me personally, I am a recovering perfectionist.
Oh, same.
Yeah.
I'm still working on that.
I'm still working on that. There have been a couple times where I've talked to my therapist. I'm like, is it really that bad? And she's like, yes.
I like your therapist.
Right. Because I was one of those people in school. I was very like over the top, get it all done. Everything was perfect. Got me through high school, got me into a good college, got me through college. Like, it was a very good crutch for me. So I'm like, are you sure we want to take that crutch away? And she's like, yes, we do. So I have always held myself to such a very high standard because of my perfectionism. So I think that was part of it, was I had this super high standard that I could never reasonably attain. So that's why if you follow Beyond PPD a lot, you will see a lot of my posts revolve around you are enough. You have always been enough. You will always will be enough. Because that's how I felt when I was going through this, was I am not good enough. Because the bar was so high that I had set for myself that I was like, I am not enough. So I try to really hammer that home, that like, you are always good enough, and you have always been good enough, and you will always be good enough. So I think that played a very direct role in those feelings of failure. But then, like, you do also, and this is the double-edged sword of social media, like, on the one hand, it can be extremely helpful. You're finding people, you're connecting with people that are going through the things that you're going through. But then on the other hand, like, you don't post about the days your kid cries nonstop. You don't post about the days that they had a massive blowout, and ruined like 6 outfits. You don't post about the days that nothing went right. And you're just counting down until bedtime. You never share those things. You share the good stuff. And so it's important to remember that and I have to remind myself this constantly too, it's a highlight reel. I'm not posting the low points of parenthood. I'm posting the good stuff.
Right. Yeah, so true. It's like, I don't know. I mean, I feel like with you like the breastfeeding and the colic and the reflux. And it's almost how I used to tell Chris. It was like just like one thing after another after another. And then I felt like I would get one little thing under control by, a millisecond or whatever. And then the next thing would happen. And then the next. And I almost felt like I just couldn't breathe. I could not get a break. And I remember I was telling my mom, I was like, it's just like, am I doing anything right? I'm keeping her alive. That's pretty much it at this point.
Yeah. Like, we are not thriving. We are surviving, and just barely.
Exactly. I was like, no, same. Yeah. It's wow. It's wild. Okay. So with Beyond PPD, I love your page. I think I agree with like what you said, the focus of you are enough and, the things that you repost, and it's just so uplifting and it's extremely genuine. I remember the first time I found it, I was like, oh my gosh, I need to contact this girl. And it's so funny because I've mentioned this before on other episodes, but I never DM'd anyone. Like, no, I never sent a DM in my life. No, until all of this happened. And then I was like, now I'm DMing people left and right. And it's
I'm like, hey.
Yeah, it's scary because I'm like, are they going to answer? What are they going to say? And then I've said to Chris before, I'm like, I feel like I'm trying to like audition a boyfriend. Hi, do you want to be my friend? Do you want to be on my show?
We've been through really crappy things, the same crappy things. Do we want to be friends?
It's so interesting. But yeah, the power of social media, double-edged sword for sure. But tell the listeners how to find your website.
Yeah.
If they can do any type of, I guess, consult with you or what that would look like if they were to reach out.
Yeah. So my website is beyondpostpartumdepression.com. Instagram handle is @beyondppd. I am not a mental health professional. I'm not a doctor, so I can't give you mental health advice. I can't give you medical advice. I've been through PSI's trainings. I'm hoping to take the PMHC exam very soon. That's on my list of things to do, hopefully this year. So I've been through the trainings. I have my own lived experience, and I can help point you in the direction of where you should go to find help. I can, put you in contact with someone at PSI. I absolutely love PSI and all the things that they do. There's so many free resources that are out there. And that's part of the reason too. If you're in the perinatal mental health community, you've probably heard of Bertie Meyer. She's one of like the most well-known perinatal mental health experts out there. She lives 45 minutes from me.
Have you ever showed up at her door?
I thought about it, but like, that's what I always talk about is I live 45 minutes from one of the most well-known and well-respected perinatal mental health experts in the world. And I didn't know about her. She was literally a drive down the interstate from me. And so I am very big on making sure that you know where these resources are, because I didn't, and I wish I did. So if you reach out to me, I can help. I can empathize with you. We can talk a lot about how much this sucks. And I will never, ever judge anything you say to me, because I know how terrible those thoughts are. And I know how much it takes to open up and admit that you're having those thoughts. And I will help you find the right resources to get the help that you need.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's awesome. Now, tell the listeners a little bit about PSI. So I've talked about them a little bit, but tell them how you're involved with PSI, what you have found PSI to be the most helpful, like in your healing journey.
Yeah. So I found PSI through The Climb, which is their fundraising event. I was on Facebook in like December of 2020. Maybe I had healed pretty well by this point. And before I had my daughter, I was very heavily involved with the Alzheimer's Association and the Walk to End Alzheimer's. I lost 2 grandparents to Alzheimer's disease, and we also lost my husband's grandmother to Alzheimer's disease. So unfortunately, very familiar with Alzheimer's disease and love the Alzheimer's Association. They have a very special place in my heart. They're doing absolutely amazing work. But I worked a lot on the committees that helped plan the Walk to End Alzheimer's events. And so when I was seeing things about this Climb event, I was like, I've done stuff like that before. I know how to put on an event. I know how to fundraise. I know how to do this. And so I became a Climb leader here in Hamilton County, which is just north of Indianapolis in Indiana, one of the suburbs of Indianapolis. And I decided to fundraise for the state chapter. So that got me in contact with the Indiana chapter of PSI. I actually am on their board of directors now, and I do their social media. So if you follow PSI Indiana, that's also me.
That's awesome.
And that's kind of like the entryway into social media and the entryway into Beyond PPD, because I was like, well, I'm already doing social media for Indiana. I can kind of do this for myself. So I found the climb, did 2 years of the climb with them. And then I had to take a step back when I got pregnant with my son, just because it was just too much going on. I just didn't have the time. And that second pregnancy exhaustion just hits much harder when you are also chasing around
a 3-year-old.
Yes. So I did the climb, and that was kind of like my entry into PSI and learning about all the things that they offer. So all of their resources are entirely free. So you can call or text their helpline. You'll get in contact with a volunteer who can then put you in contact with a support coordinator who is in your area, who can help you find resources in your area. So therapists, support groups, lactation consultants, all of that. They have, over 50, I think, different free online support groups for like a whole range of different topics, ranging from mental health to grief and loss support for preschoolers and toddler parents, like all of these different support groups where you can just show up just as you are. You don't have to you don't even have to turn your camera on, and just talk about what you're going through with other people that are going through the same thing that you are. They have the peer mentor program, which is where you're matched with someone that has been through a perinatal mental health disorder and has recovered, and you talk with them for 6 months to a year, just as you're kind of coming out of everything and being able to talk to someone who's been through what you've been through. Mm-hmm. They offer training for providers and all of this stuff, like helping to close these gaps, because there are so many people that don't know how to treat perinatal mental health conditions. Like, they're different. Mm-hmm. They can present as a whole different beast from, I never know how to say this right, but regular, I don't like using that word, but regular depression, regular anxiety. Yeah. That kind of thing. Yeah. So I work on their marketing team, doing social media for them too. Not all of their social media. We have a social media manager. I work with her, but just trying to, everything they do is amazing. And I love PSI.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I can't speak highly enough about them. It's a great organization. Everything they have is just, it's awesome. There's so many different resources. It's a great thing. So yeah, I'm excited that you mentioned that. That was a great little segue.
Yes, because those resources are out there and they shouldn't be hard to find.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's part of the reason why this podcast even exists, is because I kept telling Chris, back in 2020, I was like, I'm just not finding a lot of support. And I didn't even know about PSI. So that's kind of on me, I guess. But, type A, like you'll understand. There were a couple shows out at the time, but they were very like, feel your feelings and, very like emotional based. And, for us, I'm like, I need a list. I need an action plan. I need you to tell me what to do. Yes. I can appreciate how I feel, but I need steps to get over it. Yes. So, and nothing against like that very calm feeling. It's fine. It just didn't work for me at that phase in my life. And so, yeah, PSI is wonderful. So that's great. Yeah. That's cool that you run their social for Indiana. That's awesome. It's really cool.
So if you ever see PSI Indiana, that is also me.
That's awesome. That's really cool. All right. And then, okay, Courtney, this is my favorite question. I save it for last.
Okay.
What is one word that you would use to describe, I guess for you, like your path with postpartum or where you're at now? You can always choose like one word for each, but what is something that you would use to kind of describe that?
That's a really good question.
I know.
That's a really good one. I would say the biggest thing that comes up for my postpartum experience was isolation. Mm-hmm. Not only because perinatal mental health conditions can make you feel like you are the loneliest person in the whole world, because it feels like you are the only one who feels like this. You are the only one that motherhood is hard for. Everybody else is happy and blissful and look at my precious baby and everything is wonderful. This is the happiest time of my life. And you're not. You're sad. You're anxious. A lot of people get angry. It makes you feel like the loneliest person in the world. And because society says this is the best time of your life, never mind that it's really freaking hard. It's so hard. But like to go against that and say, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm angry. Nobody wants to hear that when you've had a baby. I had a very difficult pregnancy with my son. I had gestational diabetes. I had a lot of like intense pelvic pain. And I kind of lost my filter near the end of that. And I remember I was in the elevator with another woman heading up to one of my OB appointments near the very end. And she asked when I was due. And I was like, oh, August. And she goes, oh, well, you look great for how far along you are. And had absolutely zero filter by that point. And I went, yeah, it's because I feel like crap all the time. And she just didn't say a word to me the rest of the elevator ride. But everyone expects pregnant and postpartum women to be everything's wonderful, it's blissful, and you have done something amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also really hard.
Yeah.
So on top of like the mental isolation, I was also physically isolated. It was just me and my husband and our daughter, and that was all that we had.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't allowed to see anybody else. We weren't allowed to go anywhere. So when I think of my postpartum period with her, I think the one word that comes up to mind is isolation and isolating. I felt very, very alone during that time. And for this current healing journey, because healing is always a journey and there are ups and downs and it's never a straight line, and you want it to be a straight line really bad, but it never is. The thing that comes to mind is meaning making. My therapist has talked about, you hear about the 5 stages of grief, and they've actually talked about maybe there might be a 6th stage where it's meaning making and making meaning out of what you have been through and making something out of what you have gone through. And I think that's the phase of my journey that I'm in now, is finding a way to make meaning out of what I have been through. And that involves showing people that you may feel alone, but you're not. There are so many of us that know exactly how you feel, that will never judge you for how you feel, because we know you can't help it. Right. You don't want to feel this way. You're not doing this on purpose. Right. It's not your fault. There's nothing you did or didn't do. That sometimes you have all the risk factors and it makes sense why it developed, and sometimes you have none. And it's just a really crappy luck of the draw.
Right.
And sometimes you can have all the risk factors and everything's fine.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just kind of a crapshoot. A common crapshoot, but a crapshoot. Yeah. And there are so many of us that know exactly how you feel. Mm-hmm. And this is also temporary. It's treatable. And you can be better. And that's kind of the point I'm at now, is this meaning making of letting people know that it doesn't have to be like this. And you can get better. Mm-hmm. You don't have to feel like this all the time.
I love that. That's a great answer. That is really good. That's awesome. Yeah. Well, I will link your website, and I'll even put a link for PSI on there, and I'll have all the resources. And I'm just so glad that you joined us, Courtney. I really appreciate your time. And
absolutely.
Just your genuine heart for this community. I think it's wonderful.
I really
thank you so much. Yeah.
I wish I could tell the me that was in speech class her freshman year of college, that was like literally like a little vibrating ball of anxiety because she had to get up and talk in front of people, like, look where you are. She would not believe me.
No, literally, I could talk to a wall in person, like one-on-one. But you put me up in a room in speech class. Oh, I was awful as well.
Yes. I hated getting up in front of people, hated getting up in front of my classes. When I first started working, didn't even want to answer the phone. Don't talk to me. And now I'm like, hey, you want to talk about this?
Oh, it's crazy, man. Life's just wild, isn't it?
It is.
It's like the things that you never thought you'd experience that you do experience, and then things that you planned on that you don't. It's just, you never know what you're going to get, Yeah. But I think it's great. I think you obviously turned lemonade out of lemons, and, you're thriving.
I hope so. For right now.
Yeah.
Right now.
Right? Well, thanks for being here, Courtney. I'm glad that we're friends, and I look forward to our future. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you for listening. Have a great night.